Chill here with Sirius Dallas Moon and Jupiter Hour 22ing ascendant applying to Spica. I'm going to apply my Spica material by me, not for sale. And 24 midheaven Cancer. Now that I say not for sale, it sounds like I'm this exclusive club that's just trying to disinclude people. Not at all. In fact, this episode might be a venue for a lot of people to share their talents in a way that is Gen Z friendly. And I mean Gen Z friendly, not in the version that joined the elite in human sacrificing rites because they were tortured at hospitals, but Gen Z, the version that talked about the basis, which means being able to make a life while making a living, being able to have one's own thing. For the money to money. And I'm going to show you where the money gone. Now, I want to give a big shout out. And this is the Profit Door. Now, this lady is interesting, whether we agree or not, and I wouldn't agree with every single thing, but that's just the point, to have a conversation. And she understands she can't be a financial advisor, but what is she? A fundraiser. She has her sovereign trust fund. Now, if everything was on air, would we agree with every move? I probably wouldn't. That being said, it's not like I'm not going to listen to a person and then pick and sort or sort the wheat from the chaff. And that's some of the things we're going to do in this episode. So when she talks about having her own trust fund, she makes the analogy of a casino. And she says she doesn't care if people do white hat, black hat, as long as they do it in her casino with her chips. Now, of course, I'm not a lawyer, but I think common sense is enough to understand the risk, particularly when we talk about moving away from, let's say, the status quo in a country. So if that would be Africa, it would be the particular tribes, the particular bloodlines. If this is United States, again, the particular tribes, the particular bloodlines. And she mentions that as well. She talks about, hey, the Epstein could have a ring, a human trafficking ring. If another person try to do that, they get persecuted. The Epstein ring is out. People didn't get persecuted. So one could argue, hey, we'd rather have a sovereign society than have everybody running a Peter ring. I don't want to live in a world where everybody has a business and that business is a human trafficking business. But that's exactly where she talks about moving our money. So I'm going to address something because I had to look what is black hat, white hat outside of like computer systems. So in computer hacking, and I'm not a computer hacker, but the very basis I learned is that there is ethical hacking, which is white hats. There is gray hats, which is in between, and then there is black hats, which is exploitative. So apparently with economy, it works the same. Now, here is the thing that she can't say it. And I've been talking about the classified project budget. I'm really mad at you. I get mad with the big money at. That's where the big money. Now, the big money, it sounds misleading term because that's where the big debt is. And what it does, basically, the various occultistic rituals, and again, when we say occultistic, it's different to say, for example, occultistic could be, good reminder, me venerating Sedna. Which is an episode that I dedicate, although it's Jupiter hour, I dedicate this episode to Sedna. Because Sedna talks about the fact that as Sedna's father, Inuit goddess, as Sedna's father wanted power over nature, and he was willing to trade his daughter who wouldn't wed. Eventually, his daughter drowned with all the weird occultistic around her, and the entire tribe had to appease Sedna, because otherwise there'd be no food. Why no food? Why in the ocean? Even today it's relevant. Norwegian mastered the oil game like nobody has. Everybody talks about the Norwegian case as, if we take if we move with the casino analogy, we can move to the piracy analogy, we can move to the opium war, drug wars analogy. The greatest drug dealers in the world are the British Empire. Yeah, they made an empire by opium trading. And what Norway did was the analogy of, or is talked about as the analogy of, getting everybody addicted but not using the self. Would I recommend that? No. In fact, I think it gets at Norway. On the long run, it gets it. Why does it get at Norway on the long run? Where do all the war criminals run? And I'm speaking as a person who has a Rahu. But now I'm going to tell you how war criminals get done. How they get made. So, there's occult tech, which is astral techniques, occult techniques that are basically creating a chaos by a lot of violence. They are targeting also infants. That basically they're sort of corrupting the feminine. They try to have power over the feminine. Now, I want us to think about this a little bit to get out of the fact that it's very terrible and very bad thing to do, which is the point of this episode. That is also not economic. And I want us to think for a second about the sailors that had to sail the North Sea. They were trying everything. And the North Sea was considered this big, chaotic, frightening feminine. The sailors that would go to sail would have 45% of rate of return. It's not just Dutch East India. They sail the North Sea. Dutch East India was the first company that created the life insurance and was the first traded company. You say, but Chile, they did colonialism. They were running from the Inquisition. They tried everything. Some of them convert Jews, not necessarily all of them, to Protestant Calvinist Christianity or Huguenots. Then the Catholics came in. The Catholics were scared of Islam. And they everybody needed power in numbers. So people tried to get a hold of this feminine. Now here is the thing. The subjugation of the feminine to begin with is why they felt so disempowered and felt like they need to double the population. But I also want to return to innocence and think about the person that needs to provide for his wife and kids and sail the freaking North Sea. He would try everything, and he would also get into complexes when something doesn't work because he needs to have a sense of control. And I want us to take us a little bit outside what we now understand in modern times and into that environment, into that atmosphere where indeed the North Sea, the sea is the sea. And how that has shifted the entire scholarly thought, religious thought, economic thought, and practices. Now, when we think about the sea is the sea, we also think about global economy. So this type of rituals would be all across, and they would target even the infants. When an infant is dysregulated, we get somebody that, even though they could be growing to a loving parents, grows up into atmosphere of extreme internal abuse. Let alone the people that grow within these circles. Now, but these people basically would be targeted, they would be tortured at hospitals, they would be tortured in private hospitals, they would be tortured in other places. And they would be isolated. They would feel like there is no infrastructure, however well meaning, that understands. And then through this mind control, crimes would be done through them. Now, because these crimes would be done, because this torture would have been done in hospital, it's not like they can just go and get therapy. And because it would be involving the political and fiscal infrastructure. Now, whether these people would be used for white hats or black hats, there is no white hat if that infant was tortured and they have no way to heal. Now, healing sexual energy, healing from sexual boundary violation, healing erotic, non-erotic self, infant self, and adult self. What it basically means is that a person has housing, has food, has everything they need. In a society that is not slavery based, that's the status quo. Because the reason these infants are raped is to basically, it's an occultistic ritual to take from these infants and turn that into mentions and then target these people and make them believe that they have to do crime in order to have wealth. And the wealth is never suffice. And I really want to give that shout out to the wealth door, the profit door, where she says, and she says it so beautifully, there is a princess in Dubai or in so and so or in Oman or whatnot that is just waiting for you to consume processed food that never gets you satiated. Sedna, 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 sedna. Famine looks many ways. One of them is mineral absorption issues. אחר כך. Recording. Recording. Whether you call them GMOs, monosodium glutamate, any weird, it is endless new weird things in the food. Now, how these people get hanged? Those weird color fences. This affects. Now, here is the juncture. Here is the juncture. This should be particularly interesting to every single parent and non-parent. Prevention of recovery from sexual boundary violation. I'm not even talking about rape culture. That's the thing that keeps this loop. This is why, let me tell you something, when there was the Me Too a decade ago, and the first thing people wanted was like, how much money does she want that she talks? And I says, no money, because what am I to do with that money? I won't be able to absorb minerals. I want a change. And from who would I get that money? From the university that's vying for budget? Or from the person that to recover, and the point of litigation is not to punish but to recover, even if by euthanasia. The victims, I literally tried to apply for euthanasia. Because if I need to recover from being victim, they also need to recover from being perpetrator. And if I know that recovery takes housing first, independent of ability to work for unlimited time, believe in the patient, having the access to actual food, but also the will to live, like Angelica oil costed me in the dollar rate right now almost $100. And Angelica seed oil, the root is very phototoxic. And I'm an aromatherapist. I'm certified aromatherapist. This means I know how to dilute this. Because it tends to the will to live. Now, and I say, that person, they're going to need housing first, independent of ability to work, all of these oils, all of that. They ain't got money to pay me. And I don't care how much they got. They won't be able to work. So, those things are affecting your infants, and the fact that they use a no-touch techniques is no. The point is that if the infant will speak, then the family would take them to the local somebody that knows something about this, and then listen to Teal Swan talking about her story with ritual abuse. This is why it's a Chiron issue many times, because we have to pick the bits and pieces and comprise our own medicine in spite of. Now, essentially, that thing gets everyone in debt. ability. Remember Gen Z, before Gen Z started sacrificing people. And by the way, the Mayans did it, the Aztecs did it. I'm really grateful to Richard Feynman because he talks about the extinction of the Mayans and the Aztecs. And indeed, they were practicing those human sacrifice rituals. And then they got extinct. This is not Feynman, this is me connecting the dots. Now, this is Feynman. What was left was a couple of books, and they didn't even get to choose which. One of them, for example, was a cooking book. Not a metaphysical cooking book. A cooking book. I want you to think about Western, Eastern, black, white, orange, red, yellow, going poof. 3 books. One of them is a cooking book. That's these folks targeting your infants. What to do about it? First of all, now that you're aware of the problem, you can connect between Epstein dossiers and real life. That's your money, not money, no matter how hard you work. It's not the system or the game rigged against you. It's a fundamental issue of the lineages upon lineages that survived the worst things but never learned to thrive. They never learned relaxed arousal. They never learned secure attachment. Then they began to have divisions. You can have money or happy marriage. But if you marry someone, you need to take care of the children. How do you take care of the children? Wait a second. You can work and work and work. You need the game to work for you. Well, how do you protect the children if you need to rub shoulders with those that target the rape the infants? And so we had a lot of this evangelism, salvation based. What salvation? Inquisition. People are going to suffer, they're going to be tortured, but they must not forget God. That's Inquisition. It's an energy siphoning mechanism. Why do black people rule over, and this is also something she addresses here, rule over Judaic traditions? Because in Judaic traditions, they had the priesthood class and they had the royalty class. The priesthood learned to assemble to control what's within. The royalty learned to control everyone else. Now, if both rape infants, it's fundamentally undermined from that. And by the way, that's Magha. That's the Epstein dossiers. But a free person is not oppress another. When we have both teachings of controlling within and outside, then people have basically more centralized power. But even that power is fundamentally still linking to the rape of the infants. Why? Because a free man is not oppress another. A free woman, a free person is not oppress another. A free person is not control another. I talked about, I had a video when I was talking about, I was meditating on the North Sea. And a raped infant doesn't muster the within. They can become a programmer. But if they need to control the inner state of another person, and I speak as a person that grew her entire life with that need, not as a programmer, but as a very helpless person. That did not understand why is it so difficult to find a way to heal from things that are the analogy of rape. Like that's occultistic sexual boundary violation. Lineages that work on that are basically, this is exactly, I talk about the Bible and I say there's no will and consent in the Bible. It's only rape in the Bible. And last time I read Genesis, I needed to take a break. I felt depleted. And it's supposed to be a book of creation. Why dishonors the feminine and negates sovereignty? So where all the money gone? To the extortion cults. A child gets pregnant, that's money. A scandal gets fixed, that's money. Let's say Stormy Daniels will probably not see it. And what do I mean by that? Even economically, when we think about profit, our profit is not what somebody made. It's what's left after all the expenses. Now, if we include the soul into that calculation, this is why I'm saying these things don't work. It was created in certain situations, in people looking at the might of nature. But to sustain a global economy or even a local economy, individual well-being, infrastructure that actually provides. People living dead alive for 4 decades until they somehow by miraculous way tend to get to their infant issues. That in a Western society, in society where people come from all over to try and get a job or a passport or whatnot, this is not normal. Um, and again, when people were tortured at hospitals, it's not like they can just go and get therapy. And it's also very risky because the chances of a person being tortured to become a paper clipper, um, which in praxis means inquisitor, and knowing that that's your classified project budget. Awareness. knowing the word occult, and that occult can be both venerating Sedna as basically negating these type of projects, these type of Epstein dossiers, and occult that is mind control based. Knowing that the very thought that there are such and such is, and this is really very practical wisdom that is so important for economical decisions, particularly if people are going to follow the advice here and move and learn to move big money around and learn to shape industries and buy their own cities. Learn that there is also feministic AI. And that the very belief that some people should be subjugated to others is stemming from rape at infanthood, whether astral or not. I talked about the fact that we should not compromise for this particular scripture. So, this is my Bday veneration to Sedna. I'm not a financial advisor, and I don't have a sovereign trust fund, but I did want to connect some dots for people, because what they call black hats is basically raped infants. And that includes from the Supreme Court to the International Court of Law. What do you mean who? The judges. That's why they be that way. You won't be able to litigate the country for war crimes. Because if you look at a person and you say, hey, that person's a criminal, but you have not provided for the infrastructure for them to have access to choice, then you get that very, very utilitarian logic. Then those who play to that logic are going to have to live with that logic. And in that logic, the person that was tortured at hospital is not accountable for their crimes against humanity even. And I heard some testimonies of people who are almost 100 years old that survived the Holocaust today. And they talk about how they managed to survive everything, not just the Holocaust, losing a child, with a child, grievances, and so on and so forth. Lovely conversation. How about preventing Holocausts? It's not on the centurions that lived through the Holocaust. Now, in international, let's say when we think about training people for Model UN, then there are the approaches where of creating a fair play society and preparing people for, let's say, the jungle. The infant raped from the core, fundamental, has weighed all the way to the jungle. It's no longer a jungle. It dismantles humanity at literally, the Mayans did it, the Aztecs did it. They all got extinct with a couple of books, one of them a cooking book. It's not because that's all the culture they had. And the lovely thing about Gen Zers, before they started doing what is incredibly frightening, because they were tortured. That's MK Ultra and MK Ultra. It's also our legal system, our jail systems. That's the generation that defined that work should actually be making a life or making a living, making an important, giving an important contribution, marrying their high school sweethearts, um, looking to be good people, following spirituality in whichever way they saw it. Jupiter, Pluto, Jupiter, philosophy, truth, justice, defining neurodivergence rather than bipolar, by this, by that. And requiring adaptation to neurodivergence in working sectors, safety rooms, sensory safety rooms. That's the generation that was failed. And again, it's not about judgment. The millennials were too busy fighting for people to even be able to talk about suicide. They did not have a casual unalive oneself mode. We had to pick the bits and pieces from social media at the end of the road, hiding the youngsters that are committing suicide. We had to gravel with knowing that those and those and those and those and those methods could get people in the hands of the doctors that to begin with are the reason that they wanted to unalive themselves. And it's a structure, and they need to do that for the structure so that they will have a job, so that they will be able to provide for their family. And try to haggle. Yeah, cure for schizophrenia is housing first and believe in the patient. It heals schizophrenia. We had to navigate to find the road between, to find the water between the rocks. With a lot of the people not being able to drink because they were raped by the psychologist, by the psychiatrist. Intelligence that runs by training people by rape under the so-called use of sexpionage, that's what it creates. And people are invested in that because they grew up into that environment. Tyranny is simply the result of those very, very controlled upbringings. So, um, taking the smoke screen out of these basically chains of events without over triggering with gruesome details um, for people. And I know that when survivors go to interviewers, those interviewers they need to appease the media. They need to get the gruesome, and then they try to put it on the survivor. Very, very grateful for all the survivors out there. Um, and when a person tries to do a point of talents to remediate corruption, to alleviate corruption, they get accused of being a double dealer. While other people practice what they call black hat. I had no idea. So, when we understand that, and when masses of parents understand that, then they understand where the money moves. And they understand what moves the money. And they need to understand, just like with astrology. I studied astrology in the age where there were podcasts and there were a lot of free content out there. Then I challenged myself to try and do a broadcast for my own sake. I wasn't even thinking much. It was in the way between taking a break after the Me Too from academia and learning aromatherapy. or being a holistic health practitioner through aromatherapy. In fact, I never planned to get more than that. Then my Pluto square has arrives, and I do mundane astrology. I was indeed interested in that when I was in academia, but nobody spoke about it, so I thought that I would invent something. Then I saw like, oh, it has a name. People have been practicing that for quite a while even. Um, but the fact that people, even I did not know to the extent of how common it is to use astrology in the echelons. Um, so, and when a person is dealing with being tortured or something like that, they also aren't like, they aren't the most diplomatic. So, um, what more can I say? These are the things that if you would go to academia, most places in physics department, they would look already to the spirit and matter component of, let's say, particles and rethink the ontological unit in physics. But it was also a lot of other 2030 agenda that, by the way, in academia, we're so striving for knowledge that we don't, for example, I spent an entire degree in linguistics not knowing in a department that worships Chomsky, not knowing about what was the philosophy behind universal grammar. Then I go on a date with a guy that talks about eating cockroaches or whatnot, flies or stuff like what is it? And like it's a source of carbon, and I was like trying all kinds of different diets, and I'm like, that's cool. I can put that in the yogurt. It's like, well, Chomsky was thinking to do universal grammar as a logos basis for universal communication. Now it has both the communication part of it and the one world government part of it. Now, knowing that, first of all, understanding that occult can be venerating Sedna that negates Epstein dossiers as much as it can be various approaches that try to use violence to create. And even then, it's not every single thing necessarily, because there's a difference between engraving a Venus symbol on a stone and raping an infant. What is not in the open doesn't get discussed, and this type of things are aimed at. We talk about Epstein dossier as a global dossier. If that was between, how should I say that? If that was between, oh, there's this merging and acquisitions that happen in a room where you're not sitting. I would have told that in a TED talk and went back home, or maybe went on these conferences. I remember there was, and I really love the advice of the Prophet Door. to go to the local conferences, because sometimes they indeed, you know, they let people know, and then there are 5 people there, and it's absolutely true. But I want you to also know about the Epstein dossiers, because that's something to take into account before we venture into a room. Just like when people think about dating, it's not a good idea to date with a hungry heart. Understanding that our life energy is our source of wealth and well-being is kind of important. It's we people go to academia to study critical thinking. And when I look, we taught if we have good teachers, they teach us stuff like, okay, you open a book, what who are the publishers? What else do they own? Who is the editor? If I read a magazine, who owns that media? And also to learn to discern. I saw an article, and I'm not going to name the magazine, and I saw even a psychiatrist that comments and doesn't expose what was written in the article. And the article begins with all the lovely phrasing about how it's important to tend to ritual abuse and to the kidnapping of children. And then they have a phrasing that goes along the lines of, they strip girls. Somewhere out there, a girl is being stripped of her clothes. And I'm like, why does that sound like something that's not supposed to be eroticized, but is? Now, in journalism, we have a lot of cynicism. But there's a difference between a sexy title or a Holocaust joke economists' language, economist jargon is also quite, and it's also something to innovate or to change culturally. But that thing is not a Holocaust joke or a sexy title jargon. I can tell you as a person that's um, and those things matter. Now, it's important, of course, to know that these journalists are exposed since infanthood to content that they're absolutely not supposed to be exposed to and are ritually abused. Okay, so, but this is also exactly why. um, and so, understanding that this is not a thing that is just a taboo and not to be talked about. Understanding that the budget comes from classified projects budget, which means that if your infant is targeted and you want to litigate at court, first of all, who are you litigating? Secondly, it's a classified technology. The spirit and matter question in science. Now, jurisdiction, you're going to meet a person with some Libra placements. Libra is an air sign. Unless it's like an 8th house, they're going to look at things from evidence-based. They're going to look at the cold hard data because they're trained to remove their emotions from, or to have some sort of a methodology to deal with their emotions so that they are balanced when they, whether it's having a jury. And by the way, I knew a psychiatrist who was a Libra. People would always come to her to balance, because she knew how to have that exact balance of whatever cocktails they were using. But when it was about tending to, and she also knew to pick what's the right, that person needs their freedom not to be taken away. But when it came to being emotionally, if somebody was emotionally overfluted, she would know how to, she could only deal with that in, okay, prescribe so and so. I can't even speak to that person, prescribe so and so. And it was her meditative care, but what about people that can't do this type of. Now, what happens when the technology is classified and one goes to a psychiatrist and they try to balance the pills once a person is being astrally raped? Then from a Libra perspective, it's like they want to know more about it. How can they scientifically assess, or where can they study that? It also question of they need to be up to speed with the science, and Saturn exalts in the scale, so we're going to be dealing with some more conservative standards for empiricism. Okay, the opposite sign is Aries, which is innovative science, and that goes back to 1990s Laudan that later went into philosophy of law. Right before that, I caught his theories right before that, and that was the theoretical framework for my thesis, for my MBA thesis proposal. By the way, I saw an interview with, because I checked options for PhD, and he never answered my email, and then I understand why, because